In late 1997, one man was the absolute center of the wrestling universe. Bret the Hitman Hart, betrayed by the company he helped build, a martyr to millions of fans, was the biggest, most talked about free agent in the history of the business. His arrival in World Championship Wrestling wasn't just another signing, it was supposed to be the final checkmate in the Monday Night War. But instead of a coronation, it was a catastrophe. Instead of dream matches and a restored legacy, Bret walked into a nightmare of creative chaos and political backstabbing. The real tragedy of Bret Hart's career didn't happen in Montreal. Montreal was the wound. WCW was the poison that guaranteed it would never heal. This is the story of how WCW took the most valuable player in the game and completely, utterly destroyed him. To understand the disaster in WCW, you have to understand the man who walked out on WCW television for the first time on December 15, 1997. This wasn't the same Bret Hart who had confidently carried the WWF. This was a man nursing a massive emotional injury. The Montreal Screwjob wasn't just a story. It was a deep, personal betrayal that shattered his trust in the very business he dedicated his life to. He had been the standard bearer, the excellence of execution, a 5-time WWF champion who built his name on credibility and storytelling. He went to WCW looking for respect and a safe harbor to protect his legacy. And he came in with more momentum than anyone in modern history. He'd had a legendary feud with Steve Austin, he'd beaten The Undertaker, and according to his own account, he'd even knocked Vince McMahon to the floor backstage. In the fans' minds, and in his own, he was a conquering hero. What he found was a company that didn't just fail to get it, they seemed determined to squander it. The first sign that something was horribly wrong came immediately. The hottest free agent in the world, a man fans were dying to see get his hands on somebody, didn't debut in a match. On his first night on Nitro, he was announced as a special guest referee. Then, at Starrcade, WCW's biggest show of the year, was he wrestling Sting or Hollywood Hogan? Nope, he was officiating a match between an executive, Eric Bischoff, and a commentator, Larry Zbyszko. The logic, as Bischoff explained years later, was to play off the Montreal controversy and position Bret as an arbiter of justice who wouldn't let a screw job happen. But the execution was a total disaster. It instantly cooled all his momentum. Instead of a killer, they presented him as an official. This was a catastrophic miscalculation that turned the most anticipated wrestler on the planet into a supporting character in someone else's story. It was a sign of things to come. After that bizarre debut, Bret Hart found himself completely adrift. He was put into solid but ultimately secondary feuds with guys like Ric Flair and Curt Hennig. The matches were good, but they weren't the main event. He was just another guy on the roster. A very famous, very well-paid guy, but just a guy nonetheless. The unspoken truth of WCW was that there was a glass ceiling, and that ceiling's name was Hulk Hogan. Hogan wasn't just a top star, he was a political force with massive creative control. Hart has said for years that he believes Hogan actively worked to keep him out of the main event spotlight. So that dream match everyone wanted, Bret Hart versus Hollywood Hogan, it never happened. Not as a big money pay-per-view main event. The fact that the biggest match on the table was never booked tells you everything you need to know. WCW had a choice: build the future around Bret Hart's credibility, or stick with the political structure of the past. They chose the past, and Bret was left wandering a mid-card maze with no way out. If the first year was defined by neglect, the next was defined by outright creative insanity. In 1998, WCW turned Bret Hart heel, a truly baffling decision that completely alienated the fans who saw him as their betrayed hero. He was then loosely aligned with the NWO, a move that just diluted his character and made him another face in a stable that was already going stale. But the real madness began when Vince Russo took over booking in late 1999. WCW became a storm of nonsensical swerves and crash TV that was the exact opposite of everything Bret Hart stood for. His entire career was built on logic and telling a believable story in the ring. Russo's philosophy was often just about shock value. This all led to the creation of NWO 2000, a half-baked reboot of the group with Bret as its leader. The whole thing was a confusing mess from the start and quickly fell apart after Hart's injury. In a few short years, they had taken one of the most beloved characters in wrestling and made him completely incoherent. In the middle of all that chaos, there was one night where the real Bret Hart got to shine. On October 4th, 1999, on Nitro in Kansas City, Bret wrestled Chris Benoit in a tribute match for his late brother, Owen Hart. Free from the terrible storylines, the two men put on a technical classic. It was a beautiful, emotional match that was a painful reminder of what WCW could have had all along. This brief spark led to Hart finally winning the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in November 1999. On paper, it was validation, but in reality, it felt hollow. The company was in a creative and financial freefall. Winning the title in a convoluted tournament felt less like a coronation and more like being handed the keys to a sinking ship. It was simply too little, too late. The damage was already done. The creative destruction of Bret Hart was complete. The physical destruction was next. At Starrcade 1999, Bret defended his title against Goldberg. During the match, Goldberg delivered a stiff, uncontrolled kick that caught Bret square in the head. It gave him a severe concussion. Not knowing how badly he was hurt, Bret kept wrestling for days and weeks after, likely suffering more concussions that compounded the damage. In his book, Hart described performing in a total daze, thinking he just had a sore neck, while actually suffering from severe post-concussion syndrome. That kick from Goldberg wasn't just a botch, it was the final, tragic blow. It ended his career. He was forced to stop wrestling, and WCW terminated his contract in October 2000. His time there ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, heartbreaking finality. So, was WCW worse than Montreal? Montreal was the betrayal that broke Bret Hart's heart. But WCW was the long, slow, agonizing collapse that followed. If Montreal was the wound, WCW was the chaotic environment that let it fester until the damage was irreversible. WCW had the most credible and respected wrestler of his generation. They could have had dream feuds with Sting, Goldberg, and DDP. They could have used his legitimacy to build a new generation of stars. They had the ultimate weapon in the Monday Night War, and they never even figured out how to pull the trigger. The story of Bret Hart in WCW is a cautionary tale about what happens when politics wins out over passion, and when a company fundamentally fails to understand the assets it has. They didn't just misuse a wrestler, they broke a legend, and in doing so, wrote one of the most tragic chapters in the history of the sport. What do you think was WCW's single biggest mistake with Bret Hart? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look back at wrestling history, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped the business. Thanks for watching.